Hello, and thanks for being here, even if it's by accident. And I hope you're doing okay amidst everything. Week by week, it goes on changing, doesn't it? Want to share a little bit about sort of the health versus the economy issue, a bit about exams and stuff like that. But basically, I'm sharing on this parable that Anne has read to us. So make sure you've heard the reading first. It's from Matthew's Gospel, chapter 19 and 20. It sort of goes over between the two because I think it should. And if you find you are interested and want to just pick up on a couple of things, I will add what we call the supplement to this, which is the main message. So thank you for finding me here. You got to feel for governments, whether you agree with their decisions or not. How do you balance life versus livelihood, public health versus the economy? Lockdown keeps you safe, but don't earn any money, and it doesn't ultimately, therefore, pay for a health system, however that health system is paid for. There are no perfect solutions for any government to this dilemma. Good judgment is what we need to pray for and hope for and contribute towards, I hope. And for that, we need some reference points. I believe today's parable offers not a formula solution, but a very, very important reference point. This week has seen heartbreak over exam results in the UK, and I guess not universal heartbreak, but a great deal of heartbreak. How do you solve the problem when exams are cancelled and you've somehow got to replace them? And the trouble is, folks, that we've learned to trust our systems too much. Of course, we need systems. You can't manage life without some systems. But we treat our own systems like idols. We invent them and then think they're God, and they're not. We need some reference points which remind us of important things like our young people can never be graded because you cannot grade being a person. Nobody can be graded. Uh, Exams don't grade people. They tell you what happened when this particular person at this time set out to gain an A level. And the result is that story. It doesn't tell you anything all that useful about the person. It gives some information which will have its applications, but people matter, and exams ultimately don't. And we need to get a sense of proportionality. I do have an opinion about how we should handle the whole A level debacle and so on. I don't happen to agree with the current arrangements, but let's not talk about that. I think there's something far more important than my opinion or yours on that. I think we need to just get our feet back on the ground and our eyes looking clearly and our heads thinking well and regain a proper sense of priority and proportion. Don't grade people. They can't be graded. We can't be graded because we are not different grades of being. We are people, we are persons, and we all matter. We'll be returning to that because the parable is very much about that. And it's also about a basic mistake that is so common in people. It's highly common in religion. The mistake of believing that life is somehow some kind of preparation for an exam, where we'll either pass it and go to heaven when we die, or we'll fail it and go to hell. And that God is some kind of being with whom you make a bargain, who sets us the exam, and we sort of come to some deal whereby we say to God, well, if I'm really, really good, do I get to go to heaven? I do, don't I? That has to be the deal. And it's just not the deal. It's just, curiously, That kind of thinking has often been portrayed as Christian thought. It's totally unrelated to Christian thought, which is totally against all that. So we'll be exploring how we're against that and how Jesus taught something almost exactly the opposite of what so many people believe Christians are supposed to think about these things. Could you just notice for me, before I go into the parable itself, how Jesus speaks about the kingdom of heaven as being the renewal of all things? Can we just notice that little term? It's in chapter 19. The parable turns up in chapter 20, but it's all part of the same dialogue. And notice that he interchanges the idea of the coming of the kingdom of heaven with the renewal of all things. Last week I promised to sort of follow up this point a bit in the supplementary message. Turns out I didn't do that as plainly as I should have done, because a number of people have said, well, I went to it, you didn't do what I thought. And I thought, well, I thought I did. Anyway, today I will. So if you want to follow up on why Christian teaching is not an exam at the end of life, heaven or hell for eternity, etc., then do go to the supplement. We'll talk a little bit more about it there. So one day a rich man comes to Jesus and he asks him a question. He asks him the question, what good thing does he have to do to qualify for eternal life? And Jesus and the man enter into a discussion because Jesus wants the man to discover that he's asked a clumsy, inappropriate question for which there can't be an answer. Your questions really matter, because if you ask questions that can't have an answer, it's just frustrating. The man's question, what good thing do I have to do to inherit eternal life, is roughly equivalent to me going to my dentist and saying, what music should I listen to so that my teeth stay strong? Because I think my dentist would look at me and go, I don't even know where to begin this conversation. These things are totally unrelated subjects. And the rich man's question is very much in that kind of category. So Jesus' conversation with him is to try and take him out of the categories of his current understanding so that he can actually ask the questions he needs to ask. And he presents this rich man with an invitation, a call to sell up everything, give his money away to those who most need it, and then join the disciples. The man refuses. And his refusal gives rise to a second discussion. This time, not the rich man and Jesus, but the disciples and Jesus. Peter notices that the rich man was unable to give up everything, whereas in fact, he and the others had given up everything because there wasn't that much to give up. I mean, this guy, of course, he had so much to give up. And Jesus makes this very famous remark that it is easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for the rich to enter the kingdom of heaven. And the disciples are completely bamboozled by this, because they think, but we've always understood that when you come across a guy like that rich man, who's been so devout from his youth, who's been so careful to keep the commandments, who's been so attentive to his giving of alms and giving of alms meaning charity for the poor, and so on, who's just lived such an exemplary life, and God has rewarded him with wealth. How can you possibly say that those are the kind of people who find it difficult to enter the kingdom? They're surely, God is endorsing by his reward of wealth how this man has behaved. So Jesus tells them a parable to help them get onto the right track. We could see the parable as an answer to the question, does God treat us like contractors who sign a deal and must be rewarded by terms of the contract? Or does God treat us as people in need whom he's committed to helping? Well, as I always say, can you scrap the name that you may find in your edition of the Bible. Jesus did not give this parable a name, neither did Matthew, who tells it to us. It doesn't have a name, but if you want a name for it, don't call it the parable of the workers in the vineyard, because it's not about the workers in the vineyard, is it? Read it. Jesus says it's about a man who's certainly very eccentric, but the point of the parable is his unconventional employment practice. That's the surprising deal. We have this weakness of supposing the parable's about us. Therefore, we think it's about the workers in the vineyard and what they're going to get for their work. But it's not. That's a feature, but it's about a man, the employer, the vineyard owner, who does things a crazy grace way instead of a contract rewarding day. These guys who do go to work for him are in a gig economy, they're day workers, and each day they are paid, as was common in the system, of their time and place. They're paid at the end of the day because pay levels are so low that they need today's pay to meet today's bills, just buying the food and so forth. You live from day to day, quite literally. So the man in the end, at the end of the day, pays those who agreed to work for a day's wages, their day's wages. But then he gives exactly the same amount to people to whom all he had said was, I will give you what is right. I will respond to you the right way at the end of the day. He hadn't signed a specific contract for a certain amount with them. He'd simply said, it's getting late in the day, come and work for me and I'll do you right by you. It'll be okay. And they've taken up on that basis. And that's key to the parable, you see, that he wants to do what is right, not what is contractual, not what is about passing an exam or reaching a certain number of hours worked or a certain amount of harvest brought in or whatever. And he decides to use money in a different way. He wants to use money to help people rather than contract people to serve the economic system, even though the economic system is treating him better than them. All he wanted from them was a willingness to get involved. From that point on, he just said, it's your need I want to meet. And does it sound crazy to treat with money that way? Just remember, I mentioned it a few weeks back, that we have used money for less than 20% of human history. How did we survive for more than 80% of human history before somebody invented money? Well, we did. And we did by helping one another, or our ancestors, and so on. This is not silly thinking. This is the thinking that actually sustained human race for most of its history. Anyway, the point is that this parable comes out very like the celebrating father of Luke chapter 15. And the workers who have worked all day sound very like the older son in that parable. And we have sympathy for them, don't we? Because our sense of justice and goodness has been totally distorted by our conditioning. And so we're straight there with the workers who have borne the heat of the day and have sweated their way through the day when they go, well, hang on, how come they get the same as we get? And the answer is because they have the same need as you. And it's my money, I'm entitled to be nice with it if I want to be. And it's a simple picture of God's grace. Our share in the renewal of all things, or the kingdom of heaven, is not earned. As James wrote in chapter 2 of his letter in the Bible, mercy triumphs over judgment. We have a call to work for the renewal of all things. And you'll have opportunity this week to do that. There'll be a bit of planet saving you can help with, or an act of kindness, a little bit of justice you can work towards, a little bit of injustice you can overthrow. There'll be stuff you can do, whoever you are. God is concerned to involve us in the renewal of all things, starting now. It has eternity in it too. God is concerned with our worth, not our earnings, not our merit. There's no pass mark. There's just getting involved. And you can. We all can. And God can be counted on to be gracious. It's eccentric. It's not the way the world currently works. But actually the world hasn't always worked this way. Neither will it always work this way. This too will pass. But the grace of God, which we can invest in now and become caught up in now, that has eternity in it and the renewal of all things. Roll up your sleeves, get involved, do something in following Jesus. Anyway, God bless you. Have a great week ahead, and do go back through this parable and just read it with fresh eyes, won't you? It's in Matthew chapter 20, but you'll want to start reading in chapter 19. Goodbye.